Introduction. The day I stopped blaming the world. Let me tell you about Marcus. Marcus grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, the third of 5 kids, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a hospital laundry. He was smart, everyone said so. His 8th-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, told him he had a mind that could go anywhere. And for a while, Marcus believed her. By age 34, Marcus had been fired from 4 jobs, divorced once, and was sleeping on his brother's couch in Columbus. Every time something went wrong, Marcus had a perfectly logical explanation. The boss was unreasonable. The economy was rigged. His ex-wife didn't understand him. The system was stacked against people like him. He wasn't wrong about any of it. Not exactly. But he was missing something fundamental, something nobody had ever taught him. There are rules to human existence, not the kind they teach in school, not the rules printed in policy handbooks or whispered at church. These are deeper rules, invisible laws that operate whether you know about them or not, whether you believe in them or not, the same way gravity operates whether you believe in physics or not. Most people live their entire lives without ever discovering these rules. They move through decades on autopilot, reacting instead of choosing, drifting instead of directing, wondering why the same painful patterns keep showing up in different clothes. This book is about those rules. It's about why some people seem to attract success almost effortlessly, while others of equal talent keep crashing into invisible walls. It's about why certain relationships feel like they're pulling you forward while others drain every ounce of energy you have. It's about why some people age into wisdom and others age into bitterness, and what makes the difference. I've spent years studying ancient philosophical traditions, particularly the Hermetic tradition, one of the oldest wisdom systems in human history, alongside modern neuroscience, behavioral psychology, and thousands of real stories from real people in America today. What I found was startling in its consistency. Across cultures, across centuries, across every demographic category you can name, the same fundamental principles show up again and again. The ancient philosophers called them universal laws. Modern scientists call them principles of emergence or complex systems dynamics. I call them the unwritten rules because they were never written in the places we were told to look. Marcus eventually learned them. Not all at once. That's not how it works. He learned them one painful lesson at a time over 3 years of deliberate inner work. Today, he runs a logistics company in Nashville with 32 employees. More importantly, he's genuinely happy. Not the performed happiness of someone who's given up. Real happiness. The kind that comes from understanding how life actually works. He told me recently, "The strangest part is that nothing outside of me changed first. Everything changed inside, and then the outside followed. It was like I'd been trying to change the reflection without touching the mirror." That's exactly what this book is about. You are about to encounter 7 foundational principles, the unwritten rules, that govern human existence at every level. Each one will likely feel familiar because deep down you already know them. That's not a metaphor. These truths are encoded in human experience. They just haven't been clearly named for you yet. Read carefully. Take your time. Some chapters will feel like a mirror. Others will feel like a window. All of them are doors. Let's begin. You are not watching your life. You are creating it. The law of mind, how your inner world shapes your outer reality. The universe is mental. What you hold in your mind with consistency, intensity, and faith, you will eventually hold in your hands. Here is something that will either excite you or disturb you, depending on where you are right now. Your life, the one you're actually living, not the one you planned, is an almost perfect expression of what's happening inside your mind. I don't mean this in a bumper sticker way. I'm not saying think positive and everything will be fine. I'm saying something far more specific, far more powerful, and, if you're honest with yourself, far more obvious once you see it. The ancient Hermetic principle called the law of mentalism states that all of reality at its most fundamental level is mental in nature, not imaginary, mental. There's a critical difference. The universe isn't a hallucination. It's a structured, lawful system of intelligence of which your consciousness is an active, participating part. You are not a passive audience member in the theater of your life. You are, at every moment, one of its co-authors. Modern quantum physics has edged uncomfortably close to this same conclusion. At the subatomic level, the act of observation literally changes what is observed. Particles behave differently when watched. The measurement affects the measured. Science has spent a century trying to make this not mean what it seems to mean, and it keeps failing. What it seems to mean is that consciousness isn't a byproduct of the physical world. It's fundamental to it. But you don't need a physics degree to feel this truth in your own life. Think about the last time you woke up certain that your day was going to be terrible. How did it go? Now think about a morning when you felt genuinely energized and ready. Not just caffeinated, but truly ready. Same world, radically different experience, same external circumstances, different internal lens, and somehow different outcomes. The woman who changed everything by changing nothing. Outside, Sandra was a 41-year-old nurse in Phoenix, Arizona. She came to see me after reading an article about inner transformation, skeptical, but desperate enough to try something new. She'd been struggling with the same recurring problem for 15 years. Every workplace she entered seemed to eventually turn toxic. By the time she found her way to me, she'd worked at 6 different hospitals and a private clinic. Every single one had descended, in her experience, into backstabbing, favoritism, and management incompetence. "I know how this sounds," she said in our first conversation. "I know it sounds like I'm the problem, but I've talked to my friends and family and they all say the same thing. Healthcare is just like this. Every hospital is political. Every clinic has its cliques. It's not me." She wasn't entirely wrong about the industry. Healthcare workplaces can be brutal. But Sandra was missing something. Over several months, we did careful work examining what Sandra brought into every workplace she entered. Not her skills, those were excellent, but her internal operating system, her core beliefs about authority. Managers always play favorites. About colleagues. People are fundamentally competitive and self-protective. About her own role. I have to fight to be seen. These weren't conscious beliefs she'd chosen. They were automatic programs running below the surface, installed by early experiences she'd long since stopped examining. Every time Sandra walked into a new hospital, she wasn't starting fresh. She was carrying a complete mental architecture, a set of expectations, sensitivities, and behavioral defaults that systematically reproduced the environment she feared. She noticed slights faster than kindnesses. She interpreted ambiguous social cues as hostile. She preemptively defended herself against betrayals that hadn't happened yet. And in doing so, she sometimes created the very conflicts she was trying to avoid. When Sandra began to update her inner operating system, not by becoming naive or ignoring real problems, but by questioning the automatic interpretations she'd accepted as facts, something remarkable happened. The same type of institution began producing different experiences, not because the hospitals changed, because Sandra changed her relationship to what she was seeing. She's now the charge nurse in a department she loves, in a hospital she's been at for 4 years, her longest tenure ever. I used to think I needed to find the right environment, she told me recently. Now I understand that I carry my environment with me wherever I go. The environment that matters most is the one between my ears. Your mind is not a receiver. It's a transmitter. Most of us think of our minds as receivers. We believe thoughts and feelings are responses to what happens to us. The world acts. We react. Events occur. We respond. Life happens. We experience it. This model is not entirely wrong. Of course, external events affect us, but it is dangerously incomplete, because your mind is not just a receiver, it is also, constantly and powerfully, a transmitter. You are always broadcasting. Your thoughts, beliefs, expectations, and emotional defaults emit a kind of frequency, a coherent pattern of energy and attention that shapes what you notice, what you pursue, who you attract, and how you interpret everything you encounter. Two people can walk through the same neighborhood, attend the same meeting, be in the same relationship, and live entirely different experiences because they are broadcasting on different frequencies. This is not mysticism. This is the ordinary magic of selective attention, neurological pattern matching, interpersonal signaling, and behavioral consistency, all operating simultaneously and mostly below conscious awareness. Your brain processes approximately 11 million bits of information per second. You are consciously aware of perhaps 40. The filter that decides which 40, that filter is your mind's current programming, and your mind's programming was mostly written during the years you had the least wisdom to guide it. The law of mentalism is therefore both a diagnosis and a prescription. The diagnosis: the life you're living is a fairly accurate readout of your current inner programming. The prescription: if you want a different life, the most powerful lever available to you is an upgrade to that programming. The question then is not, what do I need to change out there? The question is, what needs to shift in here? That shift, and exactly how to make it, is the subject of everything that follows. 3 questions that will change how you see your life. Before moving to the next chapter, sit with these questions. Don't rush to answer them. Let them work on you. First, what is the story you've been telling about why your life looks the way it does? Not the story you'd tell a therapist, the one you tell yourself at 2 a.m. when you're most honest. What forces or factors does that story assign the most blame or credit? 2. Second, if you knew that your persistent inner beliefs were directly generating your persistent outer results, which beliefs would you most urgently want to examine? Third, in the last year, what have you seen in the world around you that might, on reflection, be a mirror of something in your own inner world? These are not comfortable questions. They are not meant to be. They are meant to be true. And truth, as any honest person will tell you, is usually a little uncomfortable before it becomes liberating. As within, so without, the law of correspondence, the mirror, between your inner and outer worlds. The outer world is a shadow cast by the inner world. Change the source of the light, and the shadow changes instantly. There's an old Hermetic maxim that has been quoted, misquoted, and misunderstood for thousands of years. As above, so below, as within, so without. Most people encounter this phrase in spiritual contexts and assume it's poetic. A beautiful metaphor, perhaps, but not literally true. They are wrong. It is one of the most literally, practically, and consistently true principles you will ever encounter. The law of correspondence states that there is a direct, structural relationship between different levels of reality. What happens at the microscopic level mirrors what happens at the macroscopic level. What happens in the solar system mirrors what happens at the atomic level. And, most relevant to your daily life, what happens in your inner world directly corresponds to what manifests in your outer world. Consider the human body for a moment. An electron orbiting a nucleus moves in patterns that are structurally similar to a planet orbiting a star. A vascular system branches in patterns nearly identical to a river delta or a bolt of lightning. The branching of neurons in the brain mirrors the branching of trees. The spiral of a seashell mirrors the spiral of a galaxy. These are not coincidences. They are evidence of a deep structural principle at work across every scale of existence. And if this principle operates at every level of physical reality, why would we think it stops at the boundary of human psychology? The invisible architecture of your relationships. David was 57 years old and had been married 3 times. Each marriage had ended, in his account, for different reasons. The first wife was emotionally unavailable. The second was controlling. The third had a drinking problem that got out of hand. 3 different women, 3 different decades, 3 different sets of circumstances, 3 identical core experiences. David felt unseen, unvalued, and ultimately abandoned. When David first came across the principle of correspondence, he was insulted by it. "Are you telling me that my 3 divorces are somehow my fault?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled frustration. "No," I said. "I'm telling you that your 3 marriages are somehow your creation. Fault is about blame. Creation is about understanding. And understanding is the only thing that will actually change what happens next." David, like most of us, had been looking at the outer world as if it were independent of him. 3 bad marriages had happened to David. They were things he had suffered. But the law of correspondence suggests a different and more useful question. What was the consistent inner structure that produced 3 consistent outer results? After months of genuine excavation, David uncovered it. Beneath his confident, self-reliant surface was a deep belief, so old and automatic he'd never questioned it, that he was fundamentally too much for people, too intense, too needy of real depth. This belief had been written into him by a father who rewarded stoicism and punished vulnerability, and it operated like an invisible magnet, drawing him to women who could not give him what he secretly needed because a part of him believed he didn't deserve to receive. Once David could see the inner architecture, he could begin to change it. Not the women he chose, not the circumstances of his marriages. The source code. He's been with his current partner for 6 years. They have what he describes as the first real relationship I've ever been in, because it's the first one I've been fully present in. The correspondence in your career. The law of correspondence operates just as powerfully in professional life. Think about the people in your workplace who seem to consistently generate the same outcomes, year after year, regardless of the company they're in. The person who always ends up in conflict with management, even after switching industries twice. The salesperson who can't seem to close, regardless of what product they're selling. The manager whose teams always seem to underperform, no matter how talented the people are when they arrive. Now think about the inverse. The person who seems to thrive in almost any environment. The leader whose teams consistently over-deliver. The entrepreneur who succeeds with one venture, loses everything in a recession, and succeeds again with a completely different venture in a completely different market. The difference, in most cases, is not luck, timing, or external circumstance. It is inner architecture. A person who carries deep anxiety about authority will tend to create friction with authority figures across contexts. Not because every boss they encounter is genuinely problematic, though some may be, but because their inner programming interprets authority as threatening, and that interpretation drives behaviors that often create the conflict they fear. A person who carries a genuine, unshakable belief in their own competence and in the essential reasonableness of other people will tend to navigate institutional complexity more successfully, not because they're naive, but because their inner state generates a different quality of engagement that produces consistently better responses from others. Changing the mirror by changing yourself. The practical implication of the law of correspondence is both challenging and deeply empowering. If you want to change what you see in your outer world, the highest leverage point of intervention is your inner world. This does not mean ignoring real external problems. Structural injustice is real. Difficult people are real. Economic constraints are real. The law of correspondence is not a prescription for passivity in the face of genuine problems. It is a description of where your power is most concentrated. You have limited power to change most external circumstances directly. You have significant power to change your internal operating system. Your beliefs, your interpretations, your emotional defaults, your behavioral patterns. And as you change those, the outer world, over time, begins to correspond differently. This week, try this practice. Pick one area of your life where you feel stuck. A relationship, a professional situation, a recurring pattern of any kind. Instead of asking, "What is wrong with this situation or person?" ask a different question. What would I have to believe about myself or the world to consistently produce this result? The answer to that question is where your real work begins. The mirror doesn't lie, but it also doesn't have to stay the same mirror forever. That choice belongs entirely to you. Everything is vibrating, including you. The law of vibration, how your frequency determines your experience. Nothing rests. Everything moves. Everything vibrates. The only difference between one thing and another is the rate of its vibration. In 1905, a 26-year-old Swiss patent clerk published 4 papers that would permanently alter humanity's understanding of the physical world. One of those papers, building on the work of Max Planck, established something that physicists are still struggling to fully absorb more than a century later. Matter, at its most fundamental level, is not solid. It is energy. It is vibration. Every atom, every particle of every atom, is in constant, ceaseless motion. The desk you're sitting at right now, if you could see it at the subatomic level, would look less like a solid object and more like a vast, mostly empty space filled with rapidly oscillating patterns of energy. The difference between a wooden desk and the air around it is not that one is solid and one is not. Both are patterns of vibration. The difference is the frequency and organization of that vibration. Albert Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared, established that matter and energy are different expressions of the same thing. Mass is essentially extremely concentrated, extremely organized energy. The boundary between physical and energetic is not as clear as our ordinary experience suggests. Now, here is where this stops being a physics lecture and starts being a guide to your life. Your thoughts are not abstract. They are electrochemical events, patterns of energy firing through the neural architecture of your brain, generating measurable electromagnetic fields that extend beyond your skull. Your emotions are not metaphors. They are complex physiological states involving hormones, neurotransmitters, and cascading electrical signals throughout your entire body. Your body, your thoughts, and your emotions are all, at the physical level, patterns of vibration. And, like all vibrating systems, they interact. Resonance. Why you attract. What you are, not what you want. In physics, resonance is the tendency of a system to oscillate with greater amplitude at certain frequencies, specifically the frequencies that match its natural frequency. When you strike a tuning fork and bring it near another tuning fork of the same pitch, the second fork begins to vibrate without being touched. It resonates. The vibration transfers. Human beings are resonance machines. We are constantly, unconsciously, calibrating ourselves to the frequencies of the people, environments, and situations around us, and broadcasting our own frequencies into those same systems. The vibe you get from a person, a room, a conversation, that's not imagination. That's resonance. You are detecting something real. The law of vibration applied to human life means this: the emotional and psychological frequency you consistently broadcast is the primary determinant of what you consistently attract and create. Fear-based consciousness, anxiety, suspicion, scarcity thinking, chronic defensiveness, vibrates at a frequency that tends to attract, amplify, and create fear-based experiences. Not because the universe is punishing you, because like frequencies resonate, because perception filtered through fear finds evidence of danger, because behavior driven by anxiety tends to generate anxious responses in others. Love-based consciousness, genuine confidence, curiosity, generosity, openness, vibrates at a different frequency, and it tends to attract, amplify, and create a different quality of experience. Again, not through magic, but through the very real and very powerful mechanisms of attention, behavior, neurological state, and interpersonal resonance. The frequency of American anxiety. The United States has a vibration problem. Americans are, by many measures, among the most anxious people on Earth. The anxiety epidemic, driven by economic precarity, social fragmentation, political polarization, 24-hour threat-amplifying media, and a culture that has confused constant busyness with genuine purpose, is not just a mental health crisis. It is a vibrational one. When a large enough portion of a population operates from a chronic state of fear and scarcity, it creates an ambient frequency that affects everyone within it. The relentless news cycle, the doom scrolling, the tribal conflict, the competitive status signaling, all of these are both symptoms and amplifiers of a collective low-frequency state. You cannot insulate yourself from this entirely, but you can learn to manage your own frequency with enough intentionality that you don't simply absorb the ambient anxiety of your environment. You can learn to be, in the truest sense, a source of a different frequency, which benefits not only you, but every person in your field of influence. This is not spiritual bypassing. You don't have to pretend the problems aren't real. You have to learn to address real problems from a higher frequency state, which, incidentally, is also where the most creative, effective, and durable solutions come from. Practical frequency management. How do you consciously raise your vibrational frequency? Not through affirmations you don't believe or forced positivity that's just suppressed anxiety wearing a costume. Through genuine practices that actually shift your neurological and emotional state. Gratitude is the most consistently powerful frequency-raising practice ever documented by psychological research. Not performed gratitude, genuine attention to what is actually working, actually good, actually present in your life right now. The neural mechanisms of genuine gratitude produce measurable shifts in brain state within minutes. They activate the parasympathetic nervous system, reduce cortisol, increase serotonin and dopamine, and shift the brain's default processing toward integration and connection rather than threat detection and avoidance. Service is the second most powerful frequency shifter. When you move your focus from "what do I need" to "what can I contribute?" Even in small ways, even in brief moments, your neurological and emotional state shifts in measurable ways. The well-documented helper's high is real. Acts of genuine service activate reward pathways in the brain that feel better and last longer than most material pleasures. Physical coherence is the third element. Your body and mind are not separate systems. They are a single integrated system. When your body is chronically tense, sleep-deprived, and under-oxygenated, your mind's capacity for high-frequency states is severely compromised. Sleep, movement, breath, these are not luxuries. They are the hardware requirements for the software we're trying to run. The question to carry with you from this chapter is simple but powerful. What frequency am I broadcasting right now? And is that the frequency I want to be transmitting into my relationships, my work, and my life? The gift. Hidden inside. Every opposite, the law of polarity and the law of rhythm, dancing with life's inevitable cycles. Polarity is not a problem to be solved. It is the engine by which all growth becomes possible. Here is something nobody ever tells you. The very worst thing that happened to you contained the seeds of the very best thing that could happen to you. This is not a motivational platitude. It is a structural feature of reality, described by two closely related universal laws, the law of polarity and the law of rhythm, that together explain one of the most consistent patterns in every successful human life: transformation through opposition. The law of polarity states that everything in existence has an opposite pole, and that these poles are not separate things. They are two ends of the same thing, the way hot and cold are two ends of the same spectrum of temperature. There is no such thing as cold in absolute terms. There is only less heat. There is no such thing as darkness in absolute terms. There is only the absence of light, failure and success, love and indifference, courage and fear, abundance and scarcity. These are not opposites in the sense of being entirely separate realities. They are poles of the same fundamental experience, separated by degree rather than by kind. This matters enormously for how we understand transformation, because if failure and success are poles of the same spectrum, then failure is not the absence of success. It is the raw material of success, waiting to be transformed. If fear and courage are poles of the same spectrum, then you don't need to eliminate your fear to become courageous. You need to move along the spectrum from one pole toward the other. The fear is already there. Courage is already there. The movement between them is available to you at any moment. James. The bankruptcy that built an empire. James was 39 when his Atlanta-based construction company filed for Chapter 11. He'd built it from scratch over 12 years. At its peak, it employed 63 people and had an annual revenue of $11 million. Then came the 2008 financial crisis, 3 clients who couldn't make payroll on their projects, and a perfect storm of bad timing that turned a healthy business into an unsustainable one within 18 months. "The day I signed the bankruptcy papers was the worst day of my life," James told me. "I'm not being dramatic. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my attorney's office for 2 hours. I couldn't move. I felt like I had failed everyone who had ever believed in me, every employee who had ever depended on me, my wife, my kids, my parents, who had always said I was going to do something great." For 6 months after the bankruptcy, James went into a depression that he describes as like being at the bottom of a well, looking up at a circle of light I couldn't reach. He took a job doing project management for a larger construction firm. He felt ashamed. He avoided old colleagues. He stopped talking about business. And then, slowly, uncomfortably, without any single dramatic turning point, something began to shift. In the forced quiet of his reduced circumstances, James began to really analyze what had gone wrong. Not to assign blame, but to understand. He discovered that his company had grown too fast, that he'd been too proud to bring in financial expertise when he needed it, that he'd let key relationships deteriorate because he was too busy to maintain them. None of this was obvious to him while he was in the middle of building. He'd been moving too fast to see clearly. "The bankruptcy was the gift I didn't know I needed," he said. "Not at the time. At the time it was just devastation. But it stopped me. And stopping was the only way I was going to see what I'd been too fast to see." James started his second company at 42. This time smaller, leaner, and built on every lesson the collapse of the first one had taught him. Today, at 54, that company has revenues of $40 million and what James calls a foundation I know won't crack because I know exactly what makes foundations crack. The law of polarity says that within the failure was the success. James had to learn how to extract it. The law of rhythm. Stop fighting the tide. The law of rhythm says that everything in existence moves in cycles, periods of expansion followed by periods of contraction, followed by expansion again, day and night, inhale and exhale, summer and winter, bull markets and bear markets, periods of creative flow and periods of apparent stagnation. This is not a metaphor. It is a description of how energy actually behaves in every complex system ever studied. And human beings are very complex systems. The problem is not that cycles exist. The problem is how most people respond to the downswing. When the tide goes out, when energy drops, when motivation wanes, when projects stall, when relationships hit rough patches, when the body gets sick, when the mind gets foggy. Most people do one of two things. They either panic, something is terribly wrong and I need to fix it immediately, or they collapse. This is my fate and I'll never get out of it. Both responses are based on the same misunderstanding, that the downswing is a malfunction rather than a natural phase of a healthy cycle. The ocean doesn't panic when the tide goes out. It doesn't interpret low tide as a sign that the ocean is dying. Low tide is simply part of what oceans do, and high tide always follows. The most effective, most resilient, most ultimately successful people I've ever encountered share one counterintuitive characteristic. They have made peace with the downswing. They don't enjoy it. They don't pretend it's comfortable. But they've developed a visceral, bone-deep trust in the rhythm, a confidence forged through experience that the contraction phase is not a dead end, but a gathering of energy for the next expansion. This trust allows them to do something most people can't do during a downswing: use it. The low-tide periods are when reflection happens, when foundations get reinforced, when the quiet work of preparation takes place that makes the next expansion sustainable. You cannot do this work effectively if you're spending all your energy panicking about the low tide. How to work with the rhythm instead of against it. The first step is recognition. Learn to identify where you are in the cycle. When energy is high, creativity is flowing, and opportunities seem to present themselves easily. That's the expansion phase. Ride it. Move fast. Make commitments. Launch things. When energy drops, focus narrows, and everything seems harder than it should be. That's the contraction phase. Don't fight it. Slow down. Consolidate. Reflect. Rest. The second step is non-identification. You are not the cycle. You are the consciousness experiencing the cycle. When you're in a contraction phase, you are not a person who is fundamentally stuck, broken, or failing. You are a person who is in the contraction phase of a cycle, which will eventually, reliably, inevitably, reverse. Keeping this perspective is not denial. It is the kind of faith that comes from pattern recognition rather than wishful thinking. The third step is preparation. If you know the expansion phase is coming, use the contraction phase to be ready for it. What skills can you build? What relationships can you deepen? What inner work can you do? The person who uses low tide to prepare their vessel is far better positioned for high tide than the person who spends low tide mourning the receding water. The wave is not your enemy. It never was. The wave is the mechanism by which you can travel extraordinary distances if you learn to work with it rather than against it. You are not a victim of your life. You are its author. The law of cause and effect, taking radical ownership of your results. There are no accidents in the universe. Every effect has a cause. Every cause produces an effect. The question is never, why is this happening to me? The question is always, what caused this, and what will I cause next? Of all the universal laws described in this book, the law of cause and effect is simultaneously the most empowering and the most difficult to fully accept. Because fully accepting it means giving up something that, for most of us, provides a strange and addictive comfort, the identity of the victim. Let me be precise about what I mean. The law of cause and effect does not say that everything that happens to you is your fault. It does not say that victims of injustice, abuse, accident, or illness caused their own suffering. It does not deny the reality of external forces, systemic inequities, or plain bad luck. All of these are real, and dismissing them would be both dishonest and cruel. What the law of cause and effect does say is this: at every moment, regardless of what has happened to you, you possess the power to determine what you cause next. And what you cause next will produce effects. Those effects will become the circumstances of your future. Your history doesn't determine your destiny, but your current choices do. This is the principle that Newton observed in the physical world. Every action produces an equal and opposite reaction. What you put into the system, in the form of thoughts, words, choices, and actions, comes back to you in the form of consequences, relationships, opportunities, and the texture of your daily experience. The difference between explanation and responsibility. There is a profound difference between explaining why your life looks the way it does and taking responsibility for what it looks like going forward. Explanation looks backward. Responsibility looks forward. You need both, but most people only do one. Explaining is valuable. Understanding the forces that shaped you, your family of origin, the culture you grew up in, the economic circumstances of your childhood, the wounds you accumulated along the way, is not wallowing in the past. It's a necessary form of self-knowledge. You cannot effectively update a program you don't understand, but explanation without responsibility becomes a prison. If your life story is entirely a story of things that happened to you, forces that shaped you, people who failed you, systems that excluded you, then you are, by definition, powerless. Because all of those things are outside you, and you cannot change what is outside you nearly as effectively as you can change what is inside you. Responsibility, true responsibility, not self-blame, is the recognition that from this moment forward you are the primary cause in your own life. That your choices, your responses, your investments of time and attention and emotional energy, your willingness or unwillingness to grow, these are the factors most determinative of your future. This is not a comfortable recognition. It eliminates excuses. It demands something of you. It places the weight of your future squarely on your own shoulders, where it belongs, and where, honestly, it has always been, even when you were pretending otherwise. Teresa. Learning the language of causes. Teresa was a 48-year-old high school principal in rural Mississippi when she began doing the inner work described in this chapter. She was good at her job, genuinely talented, But her career had stalled, and she'd been passed over for superintendent positions 3 times in 8 years. Her explanation for this was ready and practiced. The school board was dominated by people who had old boy relationships with candidates from other districts. The superintendent selection process was more political than merit-based. Being a woman of color in rural Mississippi meant working twice as hard for half the credit. Every element of Teresa's explanation contained real truth. The system was imperfect. Bias was real. She had faced genuine obstacles that her white male counterparts had not. None of this was in question. But when Teresa committed to the deeper question, what am I causing in these situations? She found things she hadn't been looking for. She discovered that in interview situations she consistently undersold herself, a pattern rooted in a deep, early installed belief that visible ambition in a woman was off-putting, a liability rather than an asset. She discovered that she had never directly cultivated relationships with board members, seeing it as political maneuvering beneath her, when in reality it was simply relationship building, something she did superbly with her staff and students, but had withheld from the people who made decisions about her advancement. She discovered that her written applications, while technically excellent, were written in the language of what she had done, rather than the language of what she would do, the language of the past, rather than the language of the future, which is the language of leadership. None of these discoveries negated the systemic barriers she faced, but they revealed causes she could actually address, levers she actually controlled. 2 years later, Teresa was appointed superintendent of a district with 4,000 students. She was the first black woman to hold that position in that county's history. The system hadn't changed. Teresa had. The audit, tracing your effects back to their causes. Here is a powerful practice. Choose one significant result in your life. Right now, something you're proud of or something that's frustrating you, and trace it backward. Not to assign blame, but to understand causation. What choices, behaviors, and patterns of thought most directly contributed to this result? What did you invest attention in? What did you consistently avoid? What did you practice, and what did you neglect? What did you say yes to, and what did you refuse? The more honestly you can do this tracing, the more clearly you can see which of your current causes are likely to produce which future effects. And that clarity is where real change begins. You are not a passive recipient of a life handed to you by fate. You are, moment by moment, writing the next page. The question is whether you're writing it consciously or by default, whether you're choosing your causes deliberately or simply reacting to circumstances and letting the chips fall. The author of your life is you. It has always been you. The unwritten rule is simply this: pick up the pen. The inner compass that never lies, the law of intuition and reflection, trusting the wisdom you already carry. Your rational mind is an excellent servant but a poor master. The deepest intelligence you possess doesn't speak in sentences. It speaks in clarity, in resonance, in the sudden certainty that something is either right or wrong for you, if you are quiet enough to hear it. In 2005, the neuroscientist Antonio Damasio published research that permanently changed how scientists think about human decision-making. His work on patients with damage to the prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain most associated with rational, logical reasoning, revealed something shocking. People with intact logical reasoning abilities but damaged emotional processing were almost completely incapable of making good decisions in everyday life. They could analyze, they could calculate, they could weigh pros and cons with impressive precision. But they couldn't decide without the emotional signal, the gut feeling that tells you this option feels right and that one feels wrong. Pure rational processing alone was not enough to produce sound judgment. What Damasio's research confirmed is something human beings have suspected for millennia. There is a form of intelligence in the body, in the emotions, in the non-verbal, non-analytical dimensions of human awareness that is not inferior to rational reasoning. It is complementary to it, and in many of the situations that matter most, it is more reliable. The ancient traditions called this intuition. Modern science calls it somatic processing, or the enteric nervous system, the approximately 100 million neurons embedded in your gut, or affective processing, or fast thinking, as opposed to Daniel Kahneman's system, too slow, deliberate reasoning. The labels differ. The underlying reality is the same. You have access to a form of intelligence that transcends rational analysis, and most of us have spent decades systematically learning to ignore it. Why we stopped listening? We stopped listening because modern culture, especially American culture, has an almost religious devotion to rational, analytical, quantifiable thinking. We trust what can be measured. We value what can be explained. We are suspicious of anything that arrives through a channel other than logic. This has given us extraordinary things: science, technology, medicine, law. The rational tradition is not the enemy, but it has also given us a collective tendency to dismiss, override, and ultimately lose touch with the subtler dimensions of our own intelligence. The intelligence that tells a mother something is wrong with her child before any symptom appears. The intelligence that told a seasoned firefighter to evacuate a building 30 seconds before it collapsed when his rational mind couldn't identify the specific danger. The intelligence that tells a good therapist their client is not telling the full truth long before the words arrive to confirm it. These are not anomalies or coincidences. These are documented patterns of something real. The Hermetic tradition's law of intuition says that each individual consciousness has access to a wider field of intelligence, that your personal awareness is not sealed off from the larger patterns of which it is part. Modern consciousness researchers describe this as non-local mind. Whatever you call it, the practical reality is this: when you pay careful attention to the quality of your inner experience, not just your thoughts, but your felt sense, your resonance or dissonance, your intuitive pull toward or away from something, you have access to information that your rational mind alone cannot provide. The art of listening to yourself. Kevin was a partner at a large law firm in Chicago when he received an offer that looked, on every rational metric, like the opportunity of a lifetime. A significantly larger firm, significantly more money, a path toward a senior partnership that his current firm couldn't offer. He ran the numbers. He consulted mentors. He made lists of pros and cons. Every analysis pointed the same direction: take the offer. But every time he imagined himself in the new role, something in him went quiet in a way that felt less like peace and more like dread. Kevin spent 3 weeks dismissing this response. "I'm just scared of change," he told himself. "This is just imposter syndrome. Every smart person would take this." He nearly signed the contract. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He sat down, turned off his phone, and spent 2 hours asking himself not what makes sense, but what is actually true for me. What emerged, slowly and somewhat uncomfortably, was this: Kevin didn't want to be a senior partner at any law firm. What he'd been pursuing for 15 years was the approval of his father, a retired judge who had very specific ideas about what constituted a successful legal career. What Kevin actually wanted, and had wanted for a long time, was to teach. He wanted to be a law professor. He wanted to write. He wanted to think deeply about the law rather than practice it at a pace that left no time for thinking. He turned down the offer. He went back to school, at 42, for an advanced degree that qualified him to teach. He's now a professor at a law school in Chicago who publishes widely, teaches students he describes as the best part of every week, and is, by his own account, the happiest he has ever been professionally. My rational mind was ready to make a decision that would have taken me completely in the wrong direction, he told me. The only thing that saved me was getting quiet enough to hear what I actually knew. The law of reflection, the world as mirror. Closely related to intuition is the law of reflection, the principle that the outer world consistently mirrors the inner world, and that by learning to read the reflection accurately, you can learn extraordinary amounts about yourself. This goes beyond the law of correspondence described in Chapter 2. The law of reflection is more specific. It says that the things that bother you most about other people are usually qualities that exist, in some form, in yourself, qualities you may not have acknowledged or integrated, and the things you most admire in others are usually potentials that are present in you, waiting to be developed. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the dimensions of ourselves we've disowned, suppressed, or failed to develop, which then appear in our experience of others. When someone's behavior triggers you disproportionately, when your reaction is significantly larger than the situation would typically warrant, that's a signal worth investigating. Not because the other person's behavior is necessarily acceptable, but because your specific intense reaction to it is pointing at something in you. The world, in this sense, is an extraordinarily sophisticated feedback mechanism, constantly showing you what's happening inside you, if you're willing to look. The colleague who makes you furious with their arrogance, the friend who makes you quietly envious, the public figure whose success fills you with a bitterness you can't quite explain. All of these are mirrors. All of them are telling you something about yourself that your rational mind, left to its own devices, might prefer to ignore. Learning to read your own reflections is one of the most advanced forms of self-knowledge available, and it is available to anyone willing to ask, what is this person or situation showing me about myself? The answer, when you find it, is never comfortable. It is always useful. The art of mastery, living the unwritten rules. Every day, integration, practice, and the one thing all masters have in common. Mastery is not a destination. It is a relationship, a deepening, lifelong conversation between who you are and who you are becoming. We've covered a lot of ground. We've looked at the law of mind, the principle that reality is, at its core, mental, and that your consciousness is an active participant in shaping your experience. We've explored the law of correspondence, the structural relationship between your inner world and your outer world. We've examined the law of vibration, the frequency you broadcast and the frequency you attract. We've encountered the laws of polarity and rhythm, the structure of opposition and the inevitability of cycles. We've grappled with the law of cause and effect, radical ownership of what you cause and what you create. And we've touched the laws of intuition and reflection, the inner intelligence that transcends pure rationality. Now comes the hardest part, not understanding these principles. Understanding is relatively easy. You either see it or you don't, and most people, when they encounter these ideas, recognize something familiar in them. No, the hard part is living them. Actually applying them day after day in the ordinary moments of a real life, when you're tired, when you're under pressure, when the old patterns are pulling you back, when the comfortable old story is so much easier than the demanding new truth. The ancient Hermetic tradition described the ultimate goal as mastery. Not mastery over others, not mastery over circumstances, but mastery over oneself. the capacity to direct your own mind, manage your own emotional state, choose your own response, and live in conscious alignment with the laws that govern existence, rather than being thrown around by them unconsciously. True mastery, as the tradition makes clear, is not a state you achieve and then possess forever. It is a practice. It is what you do when it's difficult. It is the standard you return to after you've fallen short of it. It is the ongoing, imperfect, sometimes frustrating, ultimately magnificent project of becoming more fully yourself. What all masters have in common, over the course of my years studying human development, reading the research, working with individuals, and examining the lives of people who have genuinely mastered some dimension of human excellence, I've found one quality that appears in virtually every case, without exception. It is not talent. It is not intelligence, though most masters are intellectually engaged with their domain. It is not even discipline, though discipline is usually visible in their lives. The one quality that appears in every genuine master is honest self-examination, the consistent willingness to look at themselves clearly, to see their patterns, their blind spots, their resistances, and their gifts, without either collapsing into self-criticism or retreating into self-deception. To see themselves as they are, in service of becoming who they could be. This requires courage of a particular kind, not the dramatic public courage of the battlefield or the boardroom, but the quiet, daily courage of honesty, the courage to ask uncomfortable questions, the courage to sit with unflattering answers, the courage to change, which always involves first admitting that a change is needed. Honest self-examination is the foundation on which everything else is built. Without it, the principles in this book remain interesting ideas that don't change anything. With it, they become transformative tools. Elena, the master who kept starting over. Elena was 63 years old when she wrote me a letter, handwritten, which was unusual, describing what she called a lifetime of almost getting it right. She'd grown up in a working-class family in South Texas, the daughter of Mexican immigrants who worked the fields. She'd put herself through college and then through law school. She'd built a successful legal career. She'd raised 3 children who were, by every observable measure, healthy and accomplished. She'd survived a serious cancer diagnosis at 51 and emerged from it, as she put it, terrified and grateful in equal measure. By any external standard, Elena's life was a success story, and yet her letter was full of a particular kind of ache, the feeling of having been present for her life without having been fully alive to it, of having achieved things without fully inhabiting the achievement, of having gone through the motions of a meaningful life while, somewhere underneath, remaining disconnected from the meaning. "I've spent 63 years being responsible," she wrote, "competent, reliable, productive, all very good things, but I'm not sure I've spent very many of those years being awake." Elena had encountered the unwritten rules, or versions of them, several times during her life. She'd had moments of clarity, sometimes profound ones, but she'd never quite committed to the sustained daily practice of living by them. Life had always intervened, the demands of career, the needs of children, the practicalities of existence. What would it look like, she asked in her letter, to start really living this way at 63? Is it too late? I wrote back to her the same day, "Elena, you have not been failing to live the principles. You have been living them imperfectly, inconsistently, while doing the real and necessary work of building a life. That is what almost everyone does. The question is not whether it's too late to start. It is never too late to start. The question is simply, are you willing to start?" She was. She is now 68, semi-retired, and doing what she describes as the most honest work I've ever done. She teaches legal advocacy to first-generation college students in San Antonio. She meditates every morning for 20 minutes, not because it feels spiritual, but because it makes her more useful to the people who depend on her clarity. She has, for the first time in her memory, a consistent practice of honest self-examination. "I'm not enlightened," she wrote me recently with characteristic wryness. "I'm still impatient. I still get angry at things I should let go. But I'm awake to it now. I catch myself. I see the pattern and I choose differently, not every time, but more often than before. And that, I've decided, is what mastery actually means." She's right. That is exactly what mastery means. The daily practice of the unwritten rules, mastery is built in moments, not milestones. Here is how the unwritten rules translate into daily practice. Each morning, before the day's demands arrive, take 5 minutes to set your inner state deliberately. Not to perform a ritual, but to choose your frequency. Ask yourself, what quality do I want to bring to this day? What do I intend to cause? What version of myself do I want to be available to the people I'll encounter? This is the law of mind in daily practice. Several times during the day, pause for 30 seconds and ask, what is my current inner state, and how might it be shaping what I'm experiencing? If you're frustrated, curious, or joyful, notice it, name it. Consider how it might be influencing what you're seeing, what you're attracting, how you're being perceived. This is the law of correspondence and the law of vibration in daily practice. When something bothers you, particularly when a reaction feels disproportionate to the situation, ask the reflection question. What might this be showing me about myself? This is uncomfortable every time. Do it anyway. This is the law of reflection in daily practice. When you're in a difficult period, when energy is low, when things aren't working, when you feel stuck, remind yourself, this is the contraction phase. It is not permanent. It is necessary. What can I build, learn, or strengthen while I wait for the tide to turn? This is the law of rhythm in daily practice. At the end of each day, ask honestly, what did I cause today? What were the effects of my choices, words, and actions? Where did I fall short of who I want to be? Not to punish yourself, but to learn from the gap. This is the law of cause and effect in daily practice. And once a week, find a genuine hour of quiet, not distracted quiet, real quiet. Sit with yourself without agenda. Let the deeper intelligence that lives beneath the noise of constant activity have some space. Notice what arises. Trust it more than you typically do. This is the law of intuition in daily practice. The most important thing. I want to tell you something I tell everyone I work with, usually near the end of our time together. You are not broken. Whatever circumstances brought you to this book, whatever struggles, failures, confusions, or losses you're navigating, you are not broken. You are a complete human being who, like virtually every other complete human being, has been operating largely without an instruction manual. The unwritten rules were always there. You just didn't know to look for them. Now you know. What you do with that knowledge is, of course, entirely up to you. You can read this book, find it interesting, and move on. That's a choice. Or you can take even one of these principles, just one, and commit to genuinely applying it in your life for the next 30 days. To notice where it shows up, to practice the questions it generates, to sit with the discomfort it sometimes creates, and the clarity it eventually delivers. Start with the principle that felt most alive as you read it, not the one that seemed most logical, the one that resonated, that felt like something you already knew but hadn't yet named. Start there. The rules of human existence are not written in textbooks or religious scriptures or self-help bestsellers. They are written in the structure of your own experience. in the patterns that keep repeating, the relationships that keep mirroring, the dreams that keep insisting, the quiet voice that keeps telling you that more is possible than you've been living. They were always there, and so all along were you. Epilogue. A letter to the reader. If you've made it to this page, something in this book spoke to you. I don't know exactly what. These principles land differently for every person, depending on where they are in their lives and what they most need to see. But something kept you reading. Trust that. The world we are living in right now, in America, in this particular decade, is asking a great deal of us. It is asking us to navigate a pace of change that has no historical precedent, a degree of complexity that overwhelms our ordinary cognitive tools, a social fragmentation that makes genuine community rare and precious. The anxiety is real. The confusion is understandable. The sense that the old maps no longer match the territory is widespread and accurate. The unwritten rules are not a solution to any of these external challenges. They are something better, a way of meeting those challenges from a position of genuine inner strength, clarity, and freedom. A way of being in the world that does not depend on the world being otherwise. When you operate from the law of mind, you stop waiting for external circumstances to give you permission to live fully. When you practice the law of correspondence, you stop blaming the world for what is, at some level, a reflection of your inner state, and you discover the power you have to change that reflection. When you understand the law of vibration, you stop being helplessly reactive to the ambient anxiety of your environment and start deliberately generating the frequency you want to live in. When you embrace the laws of polarity and rhythm, you stop fighting the inevitable cycles of your life and start working with them. When you fully accept the law of cause and effect, you stop being a victim of your circumstances and become the author of your future. When you develop your relationship with intuition and learn to read your reflections, you gain access to a form of wisdom that no amount of information can replicate. These are not small things. Together, they add up to a fundamentally different relationship with life. More awake, more free, more genuinely powerful. Marcus, from the opening pages, is living that different relationship now. So is Sandra, David, James, Teresa, Kevin, and Elena. None of them did it perfectly. None of them got there quickly. All of them found that the journey itself, the deliberate, imperfect, ongoing practice of living by these laws, was more meaningful than any destination they'd imagined. The same is true for you. The journey is yours. The rules, now that you know them, are your guides. Begin. With respect and belief in your potential, the 7 unwritten rules. A quick reference. Rule 1. The law of mind. Your consciousness actively shapes your experience of reality. The inner world creates the outer world. Rule 2. The law of correspondence. As within, so without. Your outer world consistently mirrors your inner world. Change the inside, and the outside follows. Rule 3. The law of vibration. Everything, including your thoughts and emotions, vibrates at a frequency. You attract and create experiences that match your dominant frequency. Rule 4. The law of polarity. Every experience contains its opposite. Within every failure are the seeds of success. Within every darkness is the potential for light. Rule 5. The law of rhythm. Life moves in cycles. Expansion and contraction are both natural and necessary. Trust the rhythm rather than fighting it. Rule 6. The law of cause and effect. You are not a victim of your circumstances. At every moment, you are the primary cause of your future. Choose your causes deliberately. Rule 7. The law of mastery. Integration of all the above principles into a consistent daily practice, built on honest self-examination, is the work of a lifetime, and the most worthwhile work available to a human being.